Commander Zexith stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Blood Talon, watching the stars through the viewing window. His dark purple skin gleamed under the red lights of the command center. 3 golden scars ran across his face, marks of honor from battles won against lesser species. The Kethvar Dominion had ruled this part of space for over 2,000 years, and Zexith had helped expand their empire for the last 50. "Commander," called his sensor officer from across the bridge, "we have detected an unknown vessel at the edge of our territory." Zexith turned his large black eyes toward the officer. His long fingers tapped against the metal railing that surrounded his command platform. "Show me." The main screen flickered to life, displaying a 3-dimensional image of space. A small red dot blinked at the very edge of their sensor range. The object appeared to be drifting slowly through the darkness, showing no signs of active propulsion. "Distance?" Zexith asked. 12 light hours from our position, sir. The object appears to be artificial. Our computers classify it as a spacecraft, but the design is unlike anything in our databases." Zexith walked closer to the screen. His second-in-command, Sub-Commander Veltar, approached from his station. Veltar was younger than Zexith, with bright green markings on his arms that showed his noble birth. He had served under Zexith for 10 years, and had learned much about war and conquest. "Could it be a trap?" Veltar asked quietly. Zexith laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Look at the readings, my friend. This vessel shows minimal power. Output. Its construction appears primitive at best. No species in this region has the technology to threaten us." The sensor officer continued his report. "Sir, the vessel appears to be made of basic metal alloys. We detect no bio-neural networks, no living hull components. The design is very crude and angular." Zexith shook his head in disgust. The Kethvar had long ago moved beyond such primitive construction methods. Their ships were grown, not built. Living metal that could heal itself. Bio-neural networks that thought and adapted. Weapons that evolved to meet new threats. How could any intelligent species still use such backward technology? "Bring us closer," Zexith ordered. "Signal the Void Striker and Death's Edge to maintain formation. We will investigate this curiosity." The 3 Kethvar cruisers began moving toward the unknown vessel. Each ship was over a kilometer long, their hulls pulsing with organic patterns that showed they were alive. Weapon pods grew from their sides like flowers, each one capable of destroying a city. The Kethvar had used these ships to conquer 12 different species in the past century alone. As they traveled through hyperspace, Zexith thought about the last time they had encountered an unknown species. The Velkari had put up a good fight, but their technology was no match for Kethvar superiority. Within 6 months, the Velkari homeworld had been turned into a slave colony. Their survivors now worked in the deep mines of the Outer Rim, their children raised to serve their Kethvar. "Masters, estimated time to intercept?" Zexith asked. 4 hours at current speed, sir," replied his navigation officer. Zexith nodded and returned to his command chair. The chair was grown from the same living metal as the ship, and it adjusted itself to his body as he sat down. Neural connections formed between the chair and the implants in his spine, allowing him to feel the ship around him like a second skin. Hours passed in comfortable routine. The crew went about their duties with the confidence that came from never having lost a battle. Zexith reviewed reports from other sectors, approved requisitions for new weapons, and planned the expansion routes for the next year. The unknown vessel was just another small mystery to be solved, another primitive species to be cataloged and conquered. When they finally dropped out of hyperspace near the target, Zexith was surprised by what he saw. The vessel was larger than their sensors had indicated, nearly half the size of one of his cruisers. But it looked like something built by children playing with scrap metal. The hull was flat gray, marked with strange symbols and numbers. There were no organic curves, no flowing lines that showed artistic sense. It was a box with engines attached. Ugly, Veltar commented, staring at the human ship on the main screen. Primitive, Zexith agreed. But interesting. I have never seen construction. Methods quite like this. Perhaps this species has some knowledge we can use, even if their execution is crude. The human ship floated motionless in space. No lights showed on its hull except for a few small red and green indicators. There was no response to their arrival, no attempt to communicate or flee. It simply drifted like a piece of space debris. "Are there life signs aboard?" Zexith asked. The sensor officer studied his displays for several minutes before answering. "Difficult to say, sir. The hull appears to be very thick, much thicker than necessary for normal space travel. Our sensors are having trouble penetrating it, but I do detect some power signatures inside the vessel." "Weapons?" "Unknown, sir. The power patterns are unlike anything in our databases. If they are weapons, they use principles we do not understand." Zexith found this amusing. How could a species that built such crude vessels have weapons that the Kethvar could not identify? More likely, their sensors were confused by the primitive construction methods. "Signal the fleet to surround the vessel," Zexith ordered. "Standard boarding formation. Prepare a pacification team." The 3 Kethvar cruisers moved into position around the human ship. The Blood Talon took position directly above the vessel, while the other 2 ships flanked it on either side. It was a formation they had used hundreds of times before when capturing ships from lesser species. Zexith activated the communications array and broadcast on all standard frequencies. His voice carried the authority of someone who had never been refused. "Unknown vessel, you have entered territory claimed by the Kethvar Dominion. Identify yourself immediately and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in the destruction of your ship and the death of your crew." They waited. Minutes passed with no response. The human ship continued to drift silently through space, giving no sign that it had even received their message. "Perhaps they do not understand our language," Veltar suggested. "Or perhaps their communications equipment is as primitive as the rest of their technology," Zexith replied. "No matter. We will board them and get our answers directly." Zexith had boarded dozens of alien vessels during his career. The routine was always the same. Cut through the hull, flood the ship with paralysis gas, capture the crew for interrogation. Most species surrendered as soon as they saw Kthvar warriors. Those who resisted died quickly. "Sir," the sensor officer called. "Out. I am detecting some changes in the target vessel's power output." Zexith looked at the screen. The readings showed a slight increase in energy production, but nothing that seemed threatening. Probably just their life support systems responding to the presence of other ships. "Prepare the boarding pods," Zexith ordered. "I want a full capture team ready to launch in 10 minutes. As his crew prepared for the boarding action, Zexith studied the human ship more carefully. Despite its crude appearance, there was something about it that bothered him. The proportions seemed wrong somehow. Too much mass for a ship that size. Too many hard points built into the hull. And those thick armor plates looked like they were designed to hide something rather than just protect the interior. But these concerns faded as he thought about the glory of discovering a new species. The Dominion rewarded commanders who brought back new technologies and new slaves. This ugly little ship might earn him a promotion and a command of his own sector. "Boarding team ready, sir," reported his tactical officer. "Launch when ready," Zexith replied. The boarding pods shot out from the Blood Talon toward the human vessel. Each pod carried 12 Kethvar warriors equipped with the finest weapons and armor their empire could produce. They would cut through the hull, capture the crew, and bring them back for questioning. It would be over in minutes. But as the boarding pods approached the human ship, something changed. The vessel's power output suddenly spiked to levels that made Zexith's sensor officer gasp in surprise. Systems that had been dormant came online all at once, flooding space with energy signatures that dwarfed anything the Kethvar had ever seen. "What is happening?" Zexith demanded. Before anyone could answer, the human ship began to transform. Sections of the hull that had appeared to be solid armor plating retracted. revealing weapon systems that had been hidden beneath. The ugly box was revealing its true nature, and that nature was terrifying. "Sir," the sensor officer said, his voice shaking. "The target vessel is powering weapons. Multiple weapons. Energy readings are off our scales." Zexith stared at the screen in growing confusion. This was not how first contact was supposed to go. Primitive species were supposed to be helpless before Kethvar might. They were not supposed to have weapons that made his sensors scream warnings. "Recall the boarding pods," he ordered. "All ships, raise shields and prepare for—" His words were cut off as every alarm on the bridge began screaming at once. The human ship had just painted all 3 Kethvar cruisers with targeting lasers so powerful they could be felt through their shields. In the space of a heartbeat, they had gone from predators to prey. And somewhere in the back of Zexith's mind, a small voice whispered that they had made a terrible mistake. The alarms continued screaming across the bridge of the Blood Talon. Zexith gripped the arms of his command chair as his ship's living systems tried to process what they were seeing. The targeting beams from the human vessel were unlike anything in their databases. They seemed to cut through space itself, locking onto his ships with a precision that made his weapons officer nervous. "Status report," Zexith commanded, trying to keep his voice steady. Sub-Commander Veltar studied his displays with growing confusion. "Sir, the target vessel has achieved weapons lock on all 3 of our ships, but these readings cannot be correct. The power output we are detecting exceeds that of a battle station." Zexith laughed, though it sounded forced even to his own ears. "Impossible. Look at that ship, Veltar. It is built from scrap metal and primitive alloys. How could such a crude vessel have weapons more powerful than ours?" But even as he spoke, Zexith felt doubt creeping into his mind. The energy signatures were real. His ship's bio-neural networks were not malfunctioning. Something was very wrong with their assumptions about this unknown species. "Recall the boarding pods immediately," he ordered. "Have them return to safe distance." The boarding pods began turning back toward the Kethvar cruisers, but they moved slowly, too slowly. The human ship tracked their movement with mechanical precision, its hidden weapon systems following the small craft like the eyes of a hunter watching prey. On the bridge of the human warship Retribution, Captain Sarah Chen watched the alien boarding pods retreat. She sat in her command chair, a simple metal seat with no organic components and no neural interfaces. Her uniform was plain gray, marked only with rank insignia and her name. Around her, the bridge hummed with the quiet efficiency of human technology. "Captain," reported her tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, "all enemy vessels are locked. Boarding craft are retreating. Enemy shields are active, but would not present significant resistance to our weapons." Captain Chen nodded, slowly. She was a small woman with short black hair and calm dark eyes. She had commanded the Retribution for 3 years, patrolling the outer edges of human space and watching for potential threats. This was her first encounter with this particular alien species, but she had studied their tactics and technology for months. "Assessment of enemy capabilities?" she asked. "Their weapons appear to be plasma-based, probably effective against ships of similar technology. Their shields use some kind of bioelectric field generation. Armor appears to be a living metal composite that can self-repair. Overall threat level is minimal." Captain Chen studied the 3 alien cruisers on her main screen. They were beautiful ships in their own way, all flowing curves and organic patterns. They looked like they had been grown rather than built. But beauty meant nothing in combat, and she could see at least a dozen critical weaknesses in their design. "Time to target if we engage?" she asked. 4.7 seconds for complete elimination of all enemy vessels," Rodriguez replied without hesitation. Captain Chen allowed herself a small smile. The human military had been watching this region of space for years, studying the various alien empires and their technologies. The Kethvar Dominion was one of the larger powers, but their military doctrine was centuries behind human standards. They relied on intimidation and superior numbers rather than true technological advancement. "Maintain weapons lock but do not fire," she ordered. "Let them make the next move." Back on the Blood Talon, Zexith was growing frustrated with his inability to understand the situation. His sensors continued to report impossible readings from the human vessel. The ship's power output had stabilized at levels that should have been impossible for something that size. "Where was all that energy coming from, sir?" his communications officer reported. "The boarding pods have returned to safe distance. All crew members accounted for." "Good," Zexith replied. "Now signal that vessel again. Full power broadcast. On all frequencies. I want them to know who they are dealing with." The communications array powered up, sending Zexith's voice across space toward the human ship. This time, he put all his authority into his words. The voice of someone who had conquered star systems and enslaved entire species. "Unknown vessel. I am Commander Zexith of the Kethvar Dominion. You are trespassing in our territory without permission. Lower your weapons and prepare to be boarded, or we will destroy you where you float." Again, there was no response from the human ship. It continued to drift silently through space, its weapons tracking the Kethvar cruisers with mechanical precision. The silence was somehow more threatening than any words could have been. Veltar approached Zexith's command chair, speaking quietly so the rest of the crew could not hear. "Sir, perhaps we should withdraw and report this to Fleet Command. These readings are beyond our understanding." Zexith turned his black eyes toward his second-in-command. "Withdraw? From a single ship crewed by primitives? What would the Dominion think of a commander who retreated from such a pathetic opponent?" But privately, Zexith was beginning to have similar thoughts. The energy signatures were real, no matter how impossible they seemed. And there was something about the human ship's behavior that reminded him of a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. "Run a full tactical analysis," he ordered his weapons officer. "I want to know everything about that ship's capabilities." The weapons officer, a female Kethvar named Sharvan, bent over her console. Her long fingers danced across the bio-neural interface, querying the ship's living computer systems for information about their opponent. "Sir, the analysis is confusing," she reported after several minutes. "The target vessel appears to have multiple weapon systems, but we cannot identify their type or function. The power distribution suggests weapons far more advanced than anything in our databases, and the armor appears to be much thicker than necessary for normal space combat." "Thicker armor suggests a defensive mentality," Zexith said, trying to convince himself. "A species that builds thick armor is a species that expects to be attacked. They are probably cowards who rely on defense rather than superior firepower." But even as he spoke, Zexith knew his reasoning was flawed. The human ship was not behaving like a defensive vessel. It was behaving like something that had no fear of attack because it knew it could destroy anything that threatened it. On the human ship, Captain Chen was listening to the alien commander's threats through her universal translator. The Kethvar language was harsh and guttural, full of aggressive sounds that matched their military reputation. But she felt no fear or anger at their words. She had heard similar threats from dozens of alien species over the years. "Captain," her intelligence officer reported, "we have identified the alien commander. Database shows Commander Zexith, age approximately 65 standard years, veteran of multiple conquest campaigns, known for aggressive tactics and use of terror weapons against civilian populations." Captain Chen's expression hardened slightly. She had read the reports about Kethvar treatment of conquered species. Slavery, forced labor, cultural destruction, the kind of empire that humanity had sworn to oppose wherever it was found. "Any indication they have identified us as human?" she asked. "Negative, Captain. Their scans appear unable to penetrate our hull shielding. They seem to think we are just another primitive species they can easily conquer." Captain Chen nodded. This was exactly what human strategists had hoped for. Let the aliens think humanity was weak and primitive. Let them make the first aggressive move. Then demonstrate exactly why that was a mistake. Continue monitoring their communications, she ordered. Record everything. Command will want a full report on their tactics and technology. Minutes passed in tense silence. The three Kethvar cruisers maintained their positions around the human warship, but they made no aggressive moves. Zexith was clearly thinking, trying to decide how to proceed. Finally, the alien commander made his choice. His voice crackled across space once more, this time with less patience and more threat. This is your final warning, unknown vessel. You have 60 seconds to respond to our lawful commands, or we will open fire. The Kthvar Dominion does not show mercy to those who defy us. Captain Chen looked around her bridge at her crew. They were all young, all trained in the finest military academies humanity had to offer. They had studied alien psychology, alien technology, alien tactics. They knew exactly what they were dealing with, and they were ready. All stations, prepare for combat, she ordered quietly. Target acquisition protocols are now active. If they fire on us, you are authorized to respond with full force. Her crew acknowledged the order with quiet professionalism. No excitement, no fear, just calm competence. They had trained for this moment for years. They knew their ship, they knew their weapons, and they knew they were facing an enemy that had no idea what was about to happen to them. On the Blood Talon, Zexith watched the countdown timer reach 0, with no response from the human vessel. His pride would not allow him to back down now, not in front of his crew. The Kthvar Dominion had never retreated from a single unknown ship, and he would not be the first commander to show such weakness. All ships, prepare to fire, he commanded. Target their engines and weapons systems. We will disable them and take their crew alive for questioning. But as his weapons powered up, Zexith felt a chill run down his spine. The human ship had not moved, had not attempted to flee or surrender. It simply waited, like a spider in its web, ready for whatever came next. And something deep in his warrior's instincts told him that he was about to learn why that was a very bad sign. The moment Zexith gave the order to prepare weapons, everything changed. The human warship Retribution transformed from a sleeping giant into something that redefined the word predator in the minds of every Kethvar who witnessed it. Captain, Chen felt the subtle vibration through her command chair as the ship's massive fusion reactors came online. The Retribution had been running on minimal power for hours, pretending to be a helpless derelict. Now it revealed its true nature with the sudden roar of engines that could power a small city. Reactor output at 100%, reported her engineering officer. All weapon systems online. Point defense grid active. Main gun charging sequence initiated. The transformation was visible to the naked eye. Sections of the hull that had appeared to be solid armor plating began retracting with mechanical precision. Underneath lay weapon systems that the Kethvar had never imagined possible. Dozens of point defense turrets emerged from hidden compartments, their barrels tracking potential threats with inhuman speed. Missile pods deployed from the ship's sides like the petals of a deadly flower opening to the sun. But it was the main weapon that truly defied comprehension. A section of the ship's front hull retracted to reveal a barrel that stretched back nearly a quarter of the vessel's length. The railgun was a work of engineering that represented the pinnacle of human military technology, capable of accelerating projectiles to a significant fraction of light speed. On the bridge of the Blood Talon, chaos erupted as sensors tried to process what they were seeing. Alarms screamed warnings about energy levels that exceeded their measurement capabilities. The bioneural networks that controlled the ship's systems began shutting down non-essential functions to cope with the flood of impossible data. "Report!" Zexith shouted over the noise. His sensor officer was frantically working at his console, his purple skin pale with shock. "Sir, the target vessel's power output has increased by over 3,000%. We are detecting multiple weapon systems," including some that operate on principles we do not understand. Veltar stared at the main screen in horror. The human ship no longer looked like a crude metal box. It looked like a weapon designed by gods, every line and angle crafted for the sole purpose of destroying enemies. The alien beauty of Kethvar. Bioships seemed fragile and delicate in comparison. "How is this possible?" Veltar whispered. "No single ship can generate that much power." Zexith felt his confidence crumbling, but his warrior pride would not let him show weakness. "It must be some kind of trick, an illusion designed to make us think they are more powerful than they are." But even as he spoke, his tactical systems were painting a picture that made his blood run cold. The human ship was not just powering weapons, it was targeting his entire fleet with a precision that suggested it knew the exact location of every critical system on every Kethvar vessel. The Retribution. Captain Chen watched her tactical display with satisfaction. Her ship's quantum sensors had been mapping the alien vessels for hours, identifying weaknesses and calculating optimal firing solutions. The aliens' bioships were beautiful, but they were also predictable. Living systems followed patterns that could be analyzed and exploited. "Target analysis complete," reported Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez. "All enemy vessels have been classified and assigned priority targets. We have firing solutions for complete destruction or selective disabling." "Estimated engagement time?" Captain Chen asked. 4.7 seconds for total elimination of all targets. 12.3 seconds if we want to leave survivors for intelligence gathering. Captain Chen nodded. The speed advantage was overwhelming. Human weapons operated at the speed of light and thought, while the aliens were still using relatively slow plasma weapons that took time to travel between ships. In a real battle, the Kethvar would be destroyed before they could even fire. But this was not meant to be a real battle. This was meant to be a demonstration. "Charge the main railgun to 50% power," she ordered. "Target the lead alien vessel's weapon systems only. Prepare a warning shot that will disable but not destroy." The massive railgun began its charging sequence, drawing power from the ship's fusion reactors. Magnetic coils the size of subway tunnels began generating fields that would accelerate a tungsten projectile to velocities that turned matter into energy. The weapon hummed with barely contained power, filling the ship with vibrations that could be felt in every deck. Zexith watched his instruments in growing panic as the human ship's energy output continued to climb. His weapons officer reported, "Target locks from multiple systems, each one more powerful than anything in the Kethvar arsenal." His navigation officer reported that their engines were being tracked by what appeared to be missile guidance systems. His communications officer reported that their command frequencies were being jammed by signals of impossible complexity. "Sir," Sharvan called from her weapons station, "the target vessel is charging some kind of kinetic weapon. The energy buildup suggests a projectile velocity approaching light speed." Zexith felt his heart skip a beat. Light-speed projectiles were theoretical weapons that the Kethvar had never been able to build. The energy requirements were enormous, and the targeting systems needed to be impossibly precise. No ship could carry such a weapon and remain functional. "Impossible," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Sir, should we open fire?" asked his tactical officer. Zexith hesitated. Every instinct told him to attack, to show these primitives the power of the Kethvar dominion. But every sensor reading told him that attacking would be suicide. The human ship was not just more powerful than his fleet. It was more powerful than entire Kethvar battle groups. Before he could decide, the human ship made the choice for him. Captain Chen gave the order with calm precision. "Fire warning shot. Target the lead ship's forward weapon clusters. Minimum necessary force." The railgun fired with a sound like thunder being born. The tungsten projectile, no larger than a pencil, left the weapon's barrel at 30% of light speed. It crossed the space between the ships in a fraction of a second, moving too fast for Kethvar sensors to track. The projectile struck the Blood Talon's forward weapons array with the force of a small nuclear explosion, but instead of destroying the ship, it surgically removed only the weapon systems it had been aimed at. The bio-neural networks that controlled those weapons simply ceased to exist, their living metal vaporized by the impact. Zexith was thrown from his command chair as his ship shuddered under the impact. Emergency lights bathed the bridge in red as damage reports flooded in from all sections. But what shocked him most was not the damage itself, but how precise it had been. The human weapon had destroyed exactly what it had aimed at, and nothing more. "Damage report!" he shouted as he pulled himself back to his feet. "Forward weapons array completely destroyed," reported his damage control officer. "But the rest of the ship is undamaged. Sir, whatever hit us, it was targeted with impossible precision." Veltar helped Zexith back to his command chair, his green markings now pale with fear. "Sir, they could have destroyed us completely. That was a warning shot." Zexith stared at the human ship on his main screen. It had not moved from its position, had not even changed its orientation. It simply floated in space like a sleeping dragon that had swatted a fly without even opening its eyes. The weapon that had just crippled his ship's offensive capability was apparently so minor that the humans had not even considered it worth their full attention. "Sir," his communications officer reported with a shaking voice, "we are receiving a transmission from the target vessel." "Put it through," Zexith ordered. A human voice filled the bridge, speaking perfect Kethvar with an accent that somehow made the words more threatening than any scream of rage could have been. The voice was calm, professional, and completely without emotion. "Commander Zexith of the Kethvar vessel, Blood Talon. You have attempted to initiate hostile action against a vessel of the United Earth Defense Force. This constitutes an act of war according to both human law and galactic convention." Zexith opened his mouth to respond, but the human voice continued without pause. "However, we recognize that this aggression may have been the result of ignorance rather than malice. You are hereby offered a single opportunity to withdraw your forces and avoid further conflict. You have 60 seconds to begin retreat procedures." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Blood Talon in stunned silence. Zexith felt humiliation burning in his chest like acid. No one gave ultimatums to the Kethvar Dominion. No one offered them chances to retreat. They were the conquerors, the masters of this region of space. But as he looked at his tactical displays, at the readings that showed weapons beyond his understanding, aimed at his ships, Zexith realized that everything he thought he knew about the balance of power in the galaxy had just changed. The humans were not primitives to be conquered. They were apex predators who had been watching and waiting, studying their potential enemies and preparing for the day when those enemies would reveal themselves. And that day had arrived with a precision that left no room for doubt about who would emerge victorious. "Sir," Veltar said quietly, "your orders?" Zexith stared at the human ship, this instrument of impossible power that had transformed from apparent weakness into demonstrated superiority in the space of a few heartbeats. His warrior pride demanded that he fight, that he show these aliens the fury of the Kethvar Dominion. But his survival instincts, honed by 50 years of successful campaigns, told him that pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. The countdown continued, marking seconds that would determine the fate of his crew, his ships, and possibly his entire species. Zexith looked at the countdown timer on his display. 45 seconds. 44. His crew watched him with barely controlled panic, waiting for orders from a commander who had never faced a situation like this before. The silence on the bridge was broken only by the soft sounds of the ship's bio-neural networks trying to repair the damage from the human warning shot. Pride warred with survival instinct in Zexith's mind. The Kethvar Dominion had built its empire on the fear and respect of lesser species. If word spread that a single human ship had forced a Kethvar commander to retreat, it would damage their reputation across the galaxy. Other species might begin to think the Dominion was weak, vulnerable. But as he watched his tactical displays, Zexith realized that reputation meant nothing if his entire fleet was destroyed. The human ship continued to track his vessels with mechanical precision, its weapon systems locked onto critical points that would ensure maximum damage with minimum effort. 30 seconds, sir, Veltar reported quietly. Zexith made his decision. Signal the fleet. All ships, prepare to withdraw. But before his communications officer could send the message, something changed in the readings from the human vessel. The energy signatures that had been stable suddenly spiked again, climbing to levels that made his previous readings look like background noise. "Sir!" his sensor officer called out in alarm. "The target vessel is powering additional weapon systems. Energy output is increasing exponentially." On the bridge of the Retribution, Captain Chen watched the alien commander's hesitation with growing impatience. The 60-second countdown had been a courtesy, a chance for the aliens to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. But military intelligence needed data on Kethvar defensive capabilities, and sometimes the best way to gather that data was through controlled combat. "Captain," reported Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, "the lead alien vessel appears to be preparing to withdraw, but they have not begun actual retreat procedures." Captain Chen nodded. In her experience, alien commanders often needed more concrete demonstrations of human superiority before they truly understood their situation. Words were just words, but properly applied force was a universal language. "Bring all weapons systems online," she ordered. "Full power to the main battery. Target the second alien vessel for demonstration purposes." The Retribution revealed more of its hidden nature as additional weapon systems came online. Missile tubes opened along the ship's hull like the eyes of some vast creature awakening from sleep. Energy weapons emerged from concealed positions, their focusing crystals beginning to glow with barely contained power. The point defense grid expanded as more turrets deployed, creating a defensive network that could track and destroy thousands of individual targets simultaneously. But it was the main battery that truly demonstrated human engineering superiority. What the aliens had thought was a single massive railgun was actually an array of 12 separate weapons, each one capable of accelerating projectiles to relativistic speeds. The combined firepower represented the ability to crack planets and shatter moons. Zexith watched his displays in growing horror as the human ship continued to reveal new weapon systems. Each one was more powerful than the last, and his tactical computers could not even classify most of them. The energy patterns were unlike anything in Kethvar databases, suggesting principles of physics that his species had never mastered. "Sir," Sharvin reported from her weapon station, "I am detecting what appears to be a directed energy weapon of unknown type. The focusing array alone is larger than our entire main gun." "Impossible," Zexith whispered. But the word had lost all meaning. Everything about this encounter had been impossible from the beginning. Veltar leaned close to his commander's ear. "Sir, we must withdraw immediately. This vessel outguns our entire fleet." But before Zexith could respond, the human ship demonstrated exactly why withdrawal might no longer be an option. Captain Chen had chosen the second Kethvar cruiser, the Void Striker, as her demonstration target. It was positioned to the right of the human ship, its bioluminescent hull pulsing with the confident rhythms of a predator that had never been prey. The ship's commander, Captain Kthvar, had a reputation for aggression and cruelty that made him a perfect example. "Target locked," Rodriguez reported. "Firing solution calculated and verified." "Engage with minimal force," Captain Chen ordered. "Disable propulsion and weapon systems only. Leave life support intact." The human weapons fired with terrifying efficiency. The engagement lasted exactly 4.7 seconds, but those seconds redefined everything the Kethvar thought they knew about: space combat. The first strike came from the point defense grid. What the aliens had assumed were defensive weapons turned out to be capable of precision targeting at ranges that made mockery of their understanding of physics. Hundreds of micro-projectiles struck the Void Striker simultaneously, each one targeting a specific component of the ship's weapon systems. The living metal hull of the Kthvar cruiser had evolved to repair itself, to adapt to damage and grow stronger. But there was no defense against projectiles that moved at significant fractions of light speed and struck with surgical precision. The bio-neural networks that controlled the ship's weapons simply ceased to exist, their organic patterns disrupted at the molecular level. Captain Kthvar had time for one scream of rage before the second wave of attacks began. Human missile. Systems engaged with weapons that defied every principle of Kethvar military doctrine. Instead of large, powerful warheads designed to overwhelm shields, the humans used swarms of smaller projectiles that arrived simultaneously from multiple vectors. The Void Striker's defensive systems tried to respond, but they had been designed to counter the weapons of known alien species. The Kthvar expected plasma bolts that moved relatively slowly and could be intercepted or deflected. They were not prepared for kinetic weapons that moved too fast to track and energy beams that cut through their shields like they were made of paper. The ship's living hull began to die as the human weapons systematically destroyed every system that could pose a threat. Propulsion pods were severed with precision cuts that left the rest of the ship intact. Sensor arrays were blinded by focused energy bursts that overloaded their bioelectric networks. Communication systems were jammed by signals so complex that they caused the ship's organic computers to shut down rather than risk permanent damage. In less than 5 seconds, the Void Striker had been transformed from a proud warship into a helpless hulk drifting through space. The ship was intact, its crew alive, but it was as helpless as a newborn infant. Every system that could fight, flee, or call for help had been surgically removed. Zexith watched the destruction of the Void Striker with the fascination of someone witnessing their own death. The precision was inhuman, the efficiency terrifying. The humans had not simply defeated his ship, they had dissected it like a laboratory specimen, removing only the parts they considered threatening. "Damage report from the Void Striker," his communications officer reported in a voice barely above a whisper. "Put it through," Zexith ordered. Captain Kthvar's voice crackled across the communications array, filled with pain and disbelief. "Commander, they have crippled us completely. All weapons offline, engines dead, sensors blind. But they left life support intact. They could have killed us all, but they chose not to." Zexith understood the message. The humans were not trying to destroy the Kethvar fleet. They were demonstrating their ability to do so at will. They were showing mercy while simultaneously proving that mercy was entirely their choice to give or withhold. "Sir," Veltar said urgently, "the human vessel is targeting our remaining ships. We have seconds before they demonstrate their capabilities on us as well." Zexith looked at his tactical display and saw the truth that his pride had refused to accept. The human ship was not just more advanced than his fleet. It was so far beyond Kethvar technology that resistance was meaningless. His weapons could not penetrate their defenses. His shields could not stop their attacks. His speed could not match their targeting systems. The Kethvar Dominion, masters of dozens of star systems and conquerors of 12 species, had encountered something that made them look like primitives playing with stone tools. "All ships," Zexith broadcast on the fleet frequency. "Cease all hostile actions immediately. Power down weapons and shields. Prepare for full withdrawal." But even as he gave the order, Zexith knew it might be too late. The human ship was still tracking his vessels, its weapon systems ready to engage at a moment's notice. The aliens had demonstrated their superiority, but they had not yet indicated whether they would allow the Kethvar to leave alive. On the Retribution, Captain Chen watched the alien commanders surrender with professional satisfaction. The demonstration had been successful, providing valuable intelligence on alien defensive capabilities while avoiding unnecessary casualties. The mission parameters had been met with optimal efficiency. "Captain," Rodriguez reported, "all enemy vessels have powered down weapons and are attempting to withdraw. Shall we allow them to leave?" Captain Chen considered the question carefully. The aliens had initiated hostile action, which justified any response under human military law. But they had also shown wisdom in recognizing their defeat and choosing surrender over pointless resistance. "Signal the alien commander," she ordered. "I want to speak with him directly." The communication channel opened, carrying her voice, across space to the bridge of the Blood Talon. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of absolute authority backed by demonstrated power. "Commander Zexith, you have witnessed a demonstration of human defensive capabilities. Your fleet has been spared destruction as a gesture of mercy, not weakness. You will now be allowed to withdraw, but understand that this encounter has consequences." Zexith listened to the human voice with growing dread. The tone was calm, professional, completely without emotion. It was the voice of someone who had just swatted flies and was now deciding whether to clean up the remains. "Your empire has been cataloged and assessed," the human continued. "We know the location of your homeworld, your colonies, your fleet bases, and your industrial centers. We have been watching you for far longer than you realize, studying your capabilities and preparing for the day when contact would become inevitable." The implications hit Zexith like a physical blow. The humans had not stumbled into Kethvar territory by accident. They had been observing, learning, planning. This encounter was not random. It was a carefully orchestrated demonstration designed to deliver a specific message. You will return to your superiors and inform them that humanity extends an offer of peaceful coexistence. We have no interest in conquest or subjugation. We seek only to be left alone to pursue our own destiny among the stars. Zexith wanted to respond, to assert the dignity of the Kethvar dominion, but the words died in his throat. What dignity remained after such a complete demonstration of inferiority? "However," the human voice continued, "any further acts of aggression against human vessels or human interests will be met with appropriate force. We have shown you mercy today because we believe in the possibility of peace. Do not mistake that mercy for weakness." The communication ended, leaving Zexith alone with the knowledge that everything he had believed about the galaxy's balance of power had just been shattered by a single human warship and its crew of impossibly advanced warriors. The journey back to Kethvar space felt like the longest voyage of Zexith's life. His flagship, the Blood Talon, limped through hyperspace with a third of its weapon systems destroyed and its crew's confidence shattered. Behind him, the crippled Void Striker was being towed by the Death's Edge, its proud captain now reduced to a passenger on his own ship. For 3 days, Zexith sat in his command chair and tried to find words to explain what had happened. How could he tell the Dominion Council that a single alien vessel had defeated their entire patrol fleet without taking damage? How could he describe weapons that operated beyond their understanding of physics? How could he convey the casual, terrifying efficiency with which the humans had demonstrated their superiority? Veltar approached his commander's chair, carrying a datapad with the preliminary reports from all 3 ships. His green markings had faded to a sickly yellow, a sign of deep stress among his people. "Sir, the technical analysis is complete," he reported quietly. "Our weapons officers have concluded that the human vessel possessed firepower equivalent to an entire battle fleet. Their defensive capabilities appear to be beyond our ability to measure." Zexith took the datapad and scrolled through the impossible numbers. Energy output that exceeded space stations, weapon systems that fired projectiles at significant fractions of light speed, defensive networks that could simultaneously track thousands of targets. It read like science fiction rather than a combat report. "Any theories on how they achieved such technological advancement?" he asked. Veltar shook his head. "Sir, our best scientists believe they may have had centuries or even millennia more development time than we initially calculated. Their construction methods, while appearing primitive, may actually represent a completely different approach to engineering." Zexith nodded slowly. The human ship had looked crude and industrial compared to the elegant bioships of the Kethvar, but that appearance had been deceptive. While the Dominion had focused on creating beautiful living vessels that grew and adapted, the humans had apparently focused on raw efficiency and overwhelming firepower. "There is something else, sir," Veltar continued. "Our communications specialists have been analyzing the human transmissions. The linguistic patterns suggest they have been studying our language for years, possibly decades. They knew who we were before we encountered them." This information sent a chill down Zexith's spine. The humans had not stumbled into Kethvar territory by accident. They had been watching, learning, preparing. The encounter had been a carefully planned demonstration designed to send a message to the Dominion leadership. "How long until we reach home?" Zexith asked. 18 hours. "Sir, 18 hours to prepare a report that would change everything the Kethvar thought they knew about the galaxy. 18 hours to find a way to explain that their empire, built on military superiority and the fear of lesser species, had encountered something that made them the lesser species." When the 3 battered ships finally emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Kethvar home system, they were met by a squadron of defensive cruisers. The sight of their damaged fleet caused immediate alarm among the system defenders. "Commander Zexith," came the voice of Admiral Kthvar, overall commander of the home defense fleet. "Report your status immediately. What happened to your ships?" Zexith activated his communications array, knowing that his next words would be transmitted directly to the Dominion Council. There would be no way to soften the impact, no way to preserve his reputation or his career. He could only tell the truth and hope that wisdom would prevail over pride. "Admiral, we have encountered a previously unknown species possessing military technology far in advance of our own. My fleet was defeated without inflicting any damage on the enemy vessel. This report requires immediate attention from the full council." The silence that followed lasted nearly a minute. When Admiral Kthvar finally responded, his voice carried a mixture of disbelief and growing concern. "Commander, you will proceed directly to the capital. A full council session has been called. Prepare your complete report for immediate presentation." The capital world of Kethvar Prime was a monument to the Dominion's power and success. Massive bio-cities grew from the planet's surface like coral formations, their living walls pulsing, with bioluminescent patterns that could be seen from orbit. The planetary defense grid consisted of hundreds of battle stations, each one capable of destroying entire fleets. But as Zexith's shuttle descended toward the council chambers, all he could think about was how easily the human warship could have swept aside these defenses. The weapons he had witnessed could have reduced the entire planet to rubble in minutes. The council chamber was a vast organic structure that had grown from the planet's crust over thousands of years. The walls were lined with bio-neural networks that recorded every word spoken, and the ceiling opened to the sky to symbolize the Dominion's reach among the stars. 12 members of the council sat in chairs that adjusted to their individual physiologies, each one representing a different aspect of Kethvar society. High Counselor Vexmorth, an ancient Kethvar whose purple skin had darkened to almost black with age, gestured for Zexith to approach the center of the chamber. The old warrior had led the Dominion for over a century, guiding their expansion and conquest of lesser species. "Commander Zexith," Vexmorth said in a voice like grinding stone, "you stand before this council with a report that challenges everything we know about our place in the galaxy. Speak, and let the truth be heard." Zexith took a deep breath and began his report. He described the encounter in detail, from the first detection of the human vessel to the final demonstration of their overwhelming superiority. He presented the technical data, the energy readings, the precise targeting that had disabled his ships without destroying them. As he spoke, he watched the faces of the council members change from skepticism to concern to outright fear. These were beings who had ruled an empire for millennia, who had never encountered a species they could not conquer or intimidate. The concept of technological inferiority was alien to them. When Zexith finished his report, the chamber fell silent. The bio-neural networks in the walls pulsed with slow, contemplative rhythms as the council processed what they had heard. Finally, Counselor Tharak, the military strategist, spoke. "Commander, you are asking us to believe that a single ship from an unknown species defeated 3 of our finest cruisers without taking damage. Such a claim requires extraordinary evidence." Zexith activated his datapad, transmitting the sensor logs from all 3 ships to the Council's review systems. "The evidence is here, Counselor. Every reading, every weapon signature, every tactical analysis. The humans possess technology that makes our finest weapons look like primitive tools." High Counselor Vexmorth studied the data with growing alarm. His advisors whispered urgently in his ear, but he silenced them with a gesture. After several minutes of review, he looked up at Zexith with eyes that held the weight of terrible understanding. "If this data is accurate," he said slowly, "then we face a crisis unlike any in our history. This human species possesses the power to destroy our entire civilization." "Yes, sir," Zexith replied, "but they chose not to. They demonstrated their superiority and then offered peaceful coexistence. The human commander made it clear that they have no interest in conquest, only in being left alone." Counselor Chevelle, the intelligence chief, leaned forward. "But they have been watching us, studying us. How long have they been gathering information about our empire?" "Unknown, sir, but the linguistic analysis suggests years, possibly decades. They knew who I was, knew my reputation, knew our military doctrine. This encounter was planned." The implications sent ripples of unease through the council. If the humans had been observing them for years, they would know about the Dominion's expansion plans, their military weaknesses, their internal politics. They would know exactly how to strike if they chose war over peace. High Counselor Vexmorth stood slowly, his ancient frame carrying the burden of a decision that would determine the fate of their species. "The question before us is simple," he said. "Do we choose war with a species that can destroy us, or do we choose peace with a species that can protect us?" The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some council members argued for immediate military action, claiming that the Dominion could not show weakness to any species. Others pointed out that the human demonstration had been carefully designed to avoid unnecessary casualties, suggesting that peaceful coexistence was possible. In the end, it was Zexith who provided the deciding argument. "Honored counselors," he said, "I have fought in dozens of campaigns, conquered multiple species, expanded our empire across the galaxy. But I have never encountered anything like the humans. They possess not just superior technology, but superior restraint. They could have killed my entire fleet, but they chose mercy. That choice gives me hope that peace is possible." The vote was close, but wisdom prevailed over pride. The Kethvar Dominion would choose diplomacy over destruction, cooperation over conquest. As the council session ended, Zexith found himself looking up through the chamber's open ceiling at the stars. Above, somewhere out there, human ships were watching and waiting, their sensors monitoring every Kethvar transmission, their weapons ready to respond to any threat. But for the first time in years, Zexith felt hope instead of fear when he looked at those stars. The humans had demonstrated that superior power did not require cruelty, that strength could be tempered with mercy. Perhaps there was a way forward that did not end in the destruction of everything the Kethvar had built. 3 days later, a message arrived through deep space communications channels. It was brief, professional, and carried coordinates for a meeting between human and Kethvar representatives. The message was signed simply, Captain Sarah Chen, United Earth Defense Force. The galaxy had changed forever in the space of a few minutes, but perhaps that change would lead to something better than endless cycles of conquest and fear. The humans had shown them a different path, one where strength served peace rather than domination. The question now was whether the Kethvar Dominion had the wisdom to follow that path into an uncertain but hopeful future.